A mafia boss watches as a partner humiliates a waitress in Hindi. But what happens next leaves the entire VIP room in stunned silence. Look at this one. Skinny as a stick. Even if she sold her body, nobody would want to buy. The sentence, spoken in Hindi, smooth and filthy, rang through the VIP room like an invisible slap. Rajesh Malhotra didn't even bother to lower his voice. Why would he? To him, the pale, underfed white waitress standing beside the table was nothing more than a walking decoration, incapable of understanding his language. No different from a flower vase shoved into a corner, Harper Sinclair stood perfectly still. Her fingers tightened around the silver tray, with such restrained force that her knuckles turned white. Her face gave nothing away. A server like this probably goes to bed with customers at night to earn extra tip money, Vikram Shah added in Hindi, and the two of them chuckled together, pleased with themselves. Poor white people are even more pathetic than the ones in the Mumbai slums. At least those people know their place. The Meridian was the most high-end restaurant in Manhattan. Swarovski crystal chandeliers, Italian silk tablecloths imported at a price that could crush a modest life, a wine list that cost more than half a year of Harper's rent. Saturday night, 9 o'clock, a private VIP room sealed tight against sound, where conversations happened that were never meant to be known. Harper was 27 years old. She'd worked here for 11 months. To the diners, she was invisible. A thin woman in a black uniform, dark brown hair tied back in a low ponytail, worn heels hidden beneath loose pant legs, the shadows beneath her eyes covered with a cheap layer of foundation. No one looked at her twice. Kian Thorne sat motionless at the head of the table. The 36-year-old mafia boss watched everything with piercing gaze, as icy as a brewing storm. Rajesh didn't know that Kian understood Hindi, that his mother was from Mumbai, and Rajesh knew even less that Kian was watching the waitress, not glancing past her, looking straight at her, because Kian Thorne had just realized what no one else in that room had realized. The girl wasn't afraid. She was holding herself back. But what Rajesh Malhotra didn't know, what even Kian Thorne didn't yet know, was that Harper Sinclair had just memorized every word they'd said. She understood Hindi far better than they could ever imagine. In truth, she understood it better than most people in New Delhi, because 3 years ago, Harper Sinclair wasn't a waitress in Manhattan. She was a CIA language specialist, someone who had worked on top-secret intelligence operations in India, where a single wrong translation could get people killed. And tonight, she wasn't going to translate anything wrong. If you want to know how she answers back, like this video right now, share this story with anyone who's ever been looked down on because of how they appeared. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so you won't miss stories like this that reach straight into the heart. Rajesh Malhotra lifted a glass of red wine that cost $500, turning it slowly in his hand as if he were admiring a toy. The crystal light above scattered across the surface, making the dark liquid glimmer like blood. He looked Harper up and down, with the gaze of a man appraising something cheap. In Mumbai, Rajesh said in Hindi, his voice drawn out and unhurried. Housemaids know how to serve men. They know when to bow their heads and when to drop to their knees. Vikram Shah giggled, nodding along like a puppet. Harper didn't move, the silver tray in her hands held in perfect balance. She heard every word clearly, understood every shade of contempt in his tone. Yet her face remained a professional mask, without a single ripple. Then Rajesh acted. He tipped his wrist, slowly, deliberately. The wine poured out, a stream of dark red spilling straight onto Harper's white apron, spreading down onto her black skirt, soaking into the fabric like a wound bleeding open. Harper drew in a sharp, icy breath. She didn't step back. She didn't cry out. She simply stood there, feeling the cold wine seep through the cloth and run down her legs. "Oh," Rajesh said, feigning surprise, both hands lifting as if he were innocent. "My hand slipped. Just an accident." Vikram laughed louder. Rajesh turned to him and spoke in Hindi. "Look at her. Standing there like a cow. She doesn't even know how to react." Kian Thorne sat still at the head of the table. His unwavering stare never left Harper, tracking the smallest details. The way she tightened her grip on the tray, the way she swallowed hard, the way she didn't retreat even a single step. "Clean it up," Rajesh ordered in English, pointing at the floor where a few drops of wine had splashed. "Get down and wipe it." Harper looked at the small pool of wine by her feet. She looked back at Rajesh. For an instant, something flashed in her eyes, a spark she smothered immediately. "I'll call someone to clean it up, sir." "No," Rajesh slammed his hand on the table. I said you clean it. With your hands. Get on your knees. At that exact moment, the VIP room door swung open. Derek Manning walked in, his inexpensive suit slightly tight across the shoulders, his face flushed with worry. The Meridian's manager had heard there was an incident in the VIP room from Brittany, and he'd rushed so fast he'd nearly tripped. What's going on here? Derek asked, but his eyes went only to Rajesh, not to Harper. This waitress spilled wine on me. Rajesh lied without blinking. $500 a bottle. And she's refusing to clean it up. Derek turned to Harper, his eyes darkening. Sinclair, what are you doing? He poured the wine on me, Mr. Manning, Harper said, her voice calm even as her heart pounded like a drum. I didn't spill anything. You dare argue with a customer? Derek stepped closer, his voice grinding through his teeth. Mr. Malhotra is a VIP guest. He's paying $50,000 for this dinner. How much can you pay? Harper stayed silent. I asked you how much you can pay. Derek roared. I don't have $50,000, sir. Then you know your place. Derek pointed at the floor. Get on your knees. Apologize to Mr. Malhotra. Wipe this floor clean. Through the frosted glass door, Harper saw the silhouette of Brittany Cole standing there. Arms crossed, a satisfied smile spreading across her mouth. She'd been waiting for this day for a long time. Since the day Harper refused to split tips. Since the day Harper wouldn't agree to do extra with rich customers the way Brittany always did. Harper looked down at her worn, heeled shoes. She thought of Penny. Her little sister was lying in the small room at Maggie's house. Maybe drawing, maybe trapped in a nightmare. Penny hadn't spoken since the day she witnessed their mother hanging in the bedroom. 1,000 days of haunting silence. 3 years Harper had done everything to keep her close. To pay for doctors, for medication, for rent. $500 for medicine. This waitressing job was no longer a career. It was a desperate gamble against time. The dwindling crumbs from her house sale had long since vanished into the clinic's bottomless invoices. She was now drowning in debt, 3 months behind on payments, and the clinic had issued a final warning, pay by Monday, or Penny would be discharged. A single missed shift wasn't just a setback. It was the end of her sister's only hope. If she got fired tonight, what would happen to Penny? Harper looked at Derek, looked at Rajesh, smiling in triumph, looked at Vikram filming with his phone. She thought of her father, the man who'd taught her that dignity can't be bought with money. Her father had died in prison because he held on to that dignity, but her father didn't have Penny. Slowly, Harper began to bend her knees. Her right knee touched the cold floor, then her left. She knelt in the spilled red wine, the sharp scent rising into her nose, the liquid soaking through her pants. Rajesh laughed loudly, speaking in Hindi to Vikram. See? I told you. Poor white people are easier to control than the slum trash. At least those people still have a little self-respect. Harper bowed her head, her hair falling forward to hide her face. No one could see her eyes burning. No one, except Kian Thorne. The 36-year-old Mafia boss had sat like stone the entire time. He heard everything, every line of Hindi, every insult. He watched the way Rajesh looked at Harper like an animal. He watched the way Derek groveled to the man with money. And he watched the way Harper knelt down, not out of fear, but for something else. Something stronger than humiliation. Kian had seen plenty of people on their knees in front of him. Men begging for their lives. Men pleading for forgiveness. Men so terrified they couldn't control themselves. But this woman was different. She wasn't trembling. She knelt with her back straight, her shoulders unbroken. She knelt like a warrior choosing her fight, not like someone defeated. Rajesh picked up a white napkin and tossed it down in front of Harper. Wipe it, and make sure you apologize properly. Harper picked up the napkin. Her hand didn't shake. She prepared to bend down and wipe the floor. Then a voice cut through the room. Stop. Kian Thorne stood up. Not in a hurry, not with any noise. Just one single movement, smooth as a predator deciding to step out of the dark. His chair slid back without a sound, as if even an object understood how to fear a man like him. The VIP room froze. Derek Manning stopped breathing halfway through. Rajesh Malhotra turned his head, the triumphant smile going rigid on his lips. Vikram Shah lowered his phone, his fingers trembling. Kian walked forward. Each step landed in the silence like a countdown. His steely orbs never left Rajesh, and there was something in that stare that made the trafficker from Mumbai swallow hard. Harper was still on her knees on the floor, the white napkin in her hand. She looked up, not understanding what was happening. Kian stopped 2 steps away from Rajesh. He didn't look at Harper. He didn't look at Derek. He looked straight into Rajesh Malhotra's eyes. Then he spoke, and he spoke in Hindi. "You said she's skinny as a stick." Kian's voice was low, cold, each word dropping like stone. "You said even if she sold her body, nobody would buy. You said a server like her probably goes to bed with customers at night to earn extra tip money." The color drained from Rajesh's face, as if someone had pulled a plug. "And you also said," Kian went on, taking one more step, "that poor white people are more pathetic than the slum trash in Mumbai. At least those people know their place." You understand Hindi?" Rajesh stammered, his voice strangled tight. "I don't just understand it." Kian tilted his head, the gray in his eyes darkening like a sky before a storm. "I've spoken it since I learned to speak. My mother was from Mumbai. She was born in Dharavi, the slum you just mentioned." Vikram Shah dropped his phone. The crack of it hitting the floor rang out in the silence like a gunshot. "My mother was a servant before she met my father." Kian took another step, close enough now to reach Rajesh with one arm. "People looked at her with the same eyes you just used on this girl. She was humiliated in the language you just used. She died alone when I was 15. Rajesh backed up, his foot catching on the chair leg, nearly falling. "Mr. Thorne." Rajesh switched to English, his voice shaking, both hands lifted as if surrendering. "Please understand, it was just a joke. I didn't know. I didn't mean." "You didn't mean it?" Kian cut him off, still in Hindi. "You didn't mean it when you told her to get down and wipe the floor? You didn't mean it when you poured wine on her? You didn't mean it when you filmed her to make her a joke?" Kian turned to Vikram. Rajesh's lackey shrank back like a worm with salt poured on it. "Delete the video." Kian's order wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight that Vikram immediately grabbed the phone, his hands shaking so badly, he nearly dropped it again. "It's deleted. It's deleted, Mr. Thorne." Kian turned back to Rajesh. The 45-year-old trafficker, the man who'd turned hundreds of women and children into slaves, was now shaking like a leaf in front of a Mafia boss nearly a decade younger. "Mr. Thorne, please." Rajesh pressed his palms together, sounding as if he was about to cry. "Our deal. I flew here from Mumbai. 12 hours on the plane. Please give me one chance." "A deal?" Kian's mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was a wolf baring its teeth at prey. "I don't do business with men who treat servers like trash. I don't do business with men who force women to their knees to satisfy their sick ego." "But Mr. Thorne." "I'm not finished." Kian cut him off, and Rajesh went silent, as if someone had tightened a hand around his throat. "You insulted this girl. You insulted my mother. You insulted every woman who's ever had to bow her head before men like you." Kian leaned in, his voice dropping into a whisper that still carried across the room, every word clear. "Get out of here. Get out of this restaurant. Get out of New York. If I see your face in this city again, I'll show you how the Mumbai slums and hell are not the same thing." Rajesh didn't need to hear it twice. He turned and ran for the door, Vikram scrambling behind him like a dog that had been kicked. The VIP room door swung open, and Brittany Cole was standing there, the smug smile dead on her mouth. Rajesh shoved her aside and burst out, as if something was chasing him. Derek Manning stood there, pale as paper, his mouth open but no sound coming out. Kian turned to look at him. "You," Kian said, his voice ice cold. "I'll speak with you later." Derek swallowed, nodded like a wind-up toy, then backed out of the room, dragging Brittany with him as she stared in shock. The door closed. The VIP room now held only 3 people: Kian, Declan, and Harper. Harper was still kneeling on the floor, the white napkin still in her hand. She looked up, green eyes meeting his intense, stormy gaze, and in that moment, something shifted. Kian held out his hand. "Get up." His voice wasn't cold anymore. It wasn't threatening. It was simply an invitation, plain and sincere. Harper looked at that hand, the hand of a mafia boss, the hand of the man who had just protected her from humiliation. She didn't take it. Instead, Harper pushed herself up on her own, slowly, her back still straight, her shoulders still unbroken. She set the white napkin on the table, smoothed the apron stained with wine, then she looked straight into Kian Thorne's eyes, and he realized she wasn't surprised at all that he spoke Hindi. because she'd understood everything from the very beginning. Kian Thorne stood there, watching Harper with a predatory focus, his eyes narrowing like a hawk that had just realized its prey wasn't what it thought. Declan O'Brien stood by the door, huge and silent as a statue, but even he could feel the air in the room shifting. "You understand, Hindi?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Harper stood straight, her white apron still blotched with red wine. She could deny it. She could pretend to be surprised, ask, "What are you talking about?" and play the foolish waitress Rajesh believed she was. She'd played that role for 11 months here. She'd played it for 3 years of her life. But there was something about tonight, something in the way Kian Thorne had just defended her, in the way he spoke about his mother, in the way he looked at her not like a walking decoration. Harper was tired of pretending. "Yes," she said, voice even. "I understand, Hindi." Kian tilted his head, a small motion that carried meaning. He was reassessing her, rearranging every piece in his mind. "From the start of the dinner? From before you even walked into the room?" Declan let out a low whistle, a startling sound from a man who rarely spoke. Kian stepped closer, not threatening, only curious. He looked at Harper the way you look at a book wrapped in the wrong cover. The way you look at a painting hung upside down until someone finally turns it right. "Where did you learn?" "Your accent isn't the accent of a tourist who studied online. That's the accent of someone who lived in India. At least a few years." Harper hesitated for a second. Then she decided that if she was taking off the mask, she might as well take it all the way off. "I don't just know Hindi, Mr. Thorne. I know 6 languages. Hindi, Urdu, Mandarin, Arabic, Farsi, and Russian. Not to mention English and French since I was little." Silence. Declan didn't whistle again. He was staring at Harper like she was something unfamiliar, something that didn't belong on this planet. Kian stood perfectly still. His sharp, analytical gaze didn't leave her face, and she could almost see the gears turning in his head. A mafia boss didn't become a mafia boss by ignoring unusual details. And a waitress who spoke 6 languages was the most unusual detail he'd ever encountered. "Who are you?" Kian asked, his voice dropping lower. Harper held his gaze. For the first time in 3 years, she looked straight into someone's eyes without bowing her head, without flinching, without pretending she was smaller than she truly was. "I'm Harper Sinclair, a waitress at the Meridian. Employee number 73. Evening shift, Tuesday through Sunday. That's who you are now." Kian didn't accept it. "I asked who you are." Harper felt something in her chest, something buried for 3 years, stirring and demanding to be seen. She wanted to speak. She wanted to tell someone what she used to be, what she used to do, what her life was before everything collapsed. But not tonight. Not with this man. Not while she still smelled of red wine and the shame still burned on her knees. "I'm someone who needs this job," Harper said, soft but steady. "That's all." Kian studied her for a long moment. He didn't push, didn't threaten, didn't use power to force the truth out of her. He simply stood there, watching, as if he were deciding something in his own mind. "You could have walked away when Rajesh insulted you," Kian said slowly. "You could have told the manager. You could have shouted. You could have done anything. But you chose to stand there, listen to every word, and not react. Why?" Harper thought of Penny, thought of $6,500 in treatment every month, thought of her sister's eyes as she looked at Harper each night. Eyes that didn't speak yet said everything. "Because there's something more important than my pride." That answer made Kian fall silent. For the first time tonight, he didn't respond right away. He just stood there, and Harper could have sworn she saw something change in that swirling mist of his gaze. Not pity. Kian Thorne wasn't the kind of man who pitied anyone. It was understanding, recognition, as if he knew that feeling, the feeling of swallowing humiliation for something bigger than yourself. "You can go," Kian finally said, stepping aside to clear the way. Harper nodded, short and direct, not submissive. She walked toward the door, passing Declan, and the huge man also shifted aside with a kind of respect, as if she were a guest, not a server. Harper's hand touched the doorknob. "Harper Sinclair." She paused and looked back. Kian stood in the middle of the VIP room, crystal light spilling down and casting shadows over the hard angles of his face. "I'll see you again." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a promise. It was simply a fact, spoken by a man who never said anything he didn't intend to carry out. Harper didn't answer. She opened the door and stepped out. Back into the bright lights of the restaurant. Back into the laughter of diners. Back into the life she'd learned to survive for the past 3 years. But something had changed. For the first time since she'd lost everything, Harper Sinclair had let someone see who she really was. And she didn't know whether that was the best thing she'd ever done or the most terrible. Harper had barely stepped out of the VIP room when Derek Manning was already waiting. The restaurant manager stood in the hallway, his face a dark, furious purple like he was about to explode, blue veins rising along his neck. Brittany Cole stood right behind him, arms folded across her chest, a poisonous smile she didn't bother to hide. "Office, now," Derek snarled, turning and walking away without even waiting for Harper to follow. Harper went after him, her steps steady even though she knew what was coming. Her apron was still soaked with wine, the sharp smell rising every time she moved. Other employees' eyes tracked her, some curious, some pitying, some openly pleased. Derek's office sat at the end of the staff corridor, a cramped little room with a cluttered desk and the stale stink of old cigarettes. He shoved the door so hard the wall trembled, then turned back to face Harper. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Derek didn't shout, but the way his voice hissed through clenched teeth was worse than yelling. "Malhotra is a VIP guest. $50,000 for one dinner, a business relationship the restaurant took 3 years to build." "I didn't do anything, Mr. Manning," Harper said. Calm. "He poured the wine on me. He forced me to kneel. Mr. Thorne is the one who made him leave." "Shut up!" Derek slammed his palm on the desk. "You think I believe you? You must have done something to make Thorne angry. Maybe you flirted with him. Maybe you badmouthed Malhotra. I don't know what game you're playing, but the result is we lost an important client." Harper wanted to laugh. She wanted to ask Derek if he was out of his mind, thinking a waitress could flirt with a Mafia boss and make him throw out a business partner. But she knew logic had no place in this conversation. "You're fired," Derek said, his voice flat and cold. "Effective immediately. Go get your personal things and get out within 10 minutes. Harper stood there, feeling each word land like a hammer. Fired. No job. No money. No way to pay Penny's treatment this month. "My wages for this week," Harper started, "will be used to reimburse the $500 bottle of wine you spilled." Derek cut in, a cruel smile pulling at his mouth. "And if that's not enough, we'll take it from your uniform deposit. Now get out." Harper wanted to argue. Wanted to say she hadn't spilled anything. Wanted to threaten to sue. But sue with what? With whose money? With what lawyer? She was a waitress no one knew, and the Meridian was a restaurant with a professional legal team. She turned and walked out of the office. Brittany was waiting right outside the door, smiling like she'd just hit the lottery. "Told you." Brittany followed after Harper, her shrill voice dripping with delight. "You don't belong here. I knew what you were from the start. Acting pure, acting high and mighty, refusing to do extra with customers. So what now? Go be pure out on the street." Harper didn't stop. She walked straight to the locker room, opened her locker, and pulled out her old handbag. Inside were only a few things: a wallet with $17, her house key, and a small photo of Penny she always carried. "Hey," a deep voice came from behind her. Harper turned. Walt Nguyen stood in the locker room doorway, a 62-year-old man with silver hair and hands roughened from 40 years in a kitchen. The Meridian's head chef looked at Harper with sad eyes. "I heard," Walt said softly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Derek's a coward. Everyone knows it." "I'm fine, Uncle Walt." Harper tried to smile and failed. Walt didn't speak. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a white envelope, and pressed it into Harper's hand. "Uncle Walt, what is this?" $500, Walt said, his voice thick. "I've been saving for months, meant to send it to my daughter in California. But you need it more." Harper looked at the envelope, then at Walt. She wanted to refuse, wanted to say she couldn't take his money, but $500 could help her pay rent this month, could buy medicine for Penny, could give her one more week to find another job. "I'll pay you back," Harper said, her voice shaking. "You're the daughter I wish I'd had." Walt patted her shoulder. "Take it. Don't let Derek and Brittany see you cry. Don't give them that satisfaction." Harper nodded, swallowing her tears. She slipped the envelope into her bag, slung the bag over her shoulder, and walked out of the locker room for the last time. She passed through the kitchen, through the hallway, through the back door reserved for employees. No one said goodbye. No one looked at her twice. 11 months of work, and she vanished from this place as if she'd never existed. The New York night cut like a blade. Harper stood on the sidewalk, looking back at the Meridian's lights behind her, then turned and walked away. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Harper pulled it out and looked at the screen. Maggie's number. Her heart tightened. Hello? Maggie? Harper. Maggie's voice came through the phone, frantic. You've got to come to the hospital right now. Penny. Penny's having a panic episode. She's clawing at her arms. There's blood everywhere. I already called an ambulance. Mount Sinai. Harper froze on the sidewalk. The world around her blurred. I'm coming, Harper said, her voice not sounding like her own. I'm coming right now. She ran. She ran through the crowded streets of New York, weaving past pedestrians, nearly slamming into a streetlight. Her worn heels slipped on the wet pavement, but she didn't stop. Penny, her sister, the only child she had left in this world. The phone vibrated again. A message from the hospital. Harper opened it, and the world fell apart. Patient Penny Sinclair requires urgent intervention. Payment of $2,000 is required before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to continue treatment. If not, the patient will be transferred to a public medical facility. $2,000. Harper had $500 from Walt, $17 in her wallet. She needed $1,483 within 10 hours. And she had no idea where she was going to get it. The Mount Sinai emergency room blazed under harsh white lights, the smell of antiseptic hitting Harper's nose like needles. She sat on a plastic chair beside the hospital bed, staring at her little sister lying there, small and fragile as an injured fledgling. Penny was 8 years old, but she looked closer to 6. Thin, pale, her dull brown hair fanned across a white pillow. Both arms were wrapped in bandages from wrist to elbow, covering the scratches she'd carved into herself during the panic episode. The doctor said she was lucky she hadn't torn into an artery. Lucky. As if anything in Penny's life could ever be called lucky. Harper held Penny's tiny hand in her own. Even in the sedated sleep, Penny clung to her sister, those little fingers gripping as if she were afraid Harper might disappear. I'm here, Harper whispered, her voice raw. I'm not going anywhere. Penny didn't answer. Penny never answered. The silence in the room was a heavy reminder of the day their world shattered a story that began 3 years ago, on a Sunday that was supposed to be like any other. Harper looked at Penny's bandaged arms and felt the crushing weight of every moment she had failed to protect her family. Stroking her sister's hair, she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Penny. I'm so sorry for everything. Tears slid down Harper's cheeks and fell onto the white sheet. She didn't wipe them away. There was no one here she had to be strong for. No one she had to wear a mask for. The clock on the wall read 2:17 in the morning. Less than 6 hours remained before the hospital would demand payment. $2,000. $1,483 still missing. If she couldn't pay, Penny would be transferred to a public facility, where waitlists stretched for months, and doctors had only minutes for each patient. Harper looked down at her own hands. Hands that had once typed the CIA's encrypted code. Hands that had once translated documents that decided the fate of nations. Hands that had once shaken the hands of ambassadors and generals. Now those hands couldn't afford a hospital bill for her sister. She thought about selling something, but she had nothing to sell. A rented apartment, worn-out furniture, clothes from thrift stores. The most valuable thing she owned was her Georgetown degree and 5 years of CIA experience. But no one bought those things at 2 a.m. She thought about borrowing. But borrow from whom? Maggie had already let her fall 3 months behind on rent. Walt had just handed her $500, money he'd saved to send to his daughter in California. She had no friends, no family. Her father was dead in prison. Her mother was dead on a rope. She and Penny were all that was left of the Sinclair family. Penny stirred in her drugged sleep, her lips moving as if she were trying to say something. Harper leaned closer, straining to hear. There was no sound, only her faint breathing and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Harper lowered her head to the edge of the bed, her hand still gripping her sister's. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears were gone. She simply sat there in the darkness, waiting for dawn to bring something she didn't know how to face. And she didn't know that. A few miles away, in a penthouse high above Manhattan, Kian Thorne sat in front of a computer screen, reading the file of a woman named Harper Sinclair, a former CIA language specialist, the daughter of James Sinclair, A man convicted of treason 3 years earlier. Harper sat in the hospital darkness, still holding Penny's hand. But her mind had drifted back 3 years. Back to the day everything began to fall apart. It was a Sunday afternoon in November. The kind of day the Sinclair family usually spent gathered around the dinner table. Her mother, Caroline, was baking an apple pie in the kitchen, cinnamon fragrance spilling through the house. Penny, 5 years old, sat on the living room floor, scribbling on a pad of paper. Her father, James Sinclair, sat on the sofa reading the newspaper, occasionally glancing down at his youngest daughter and smiling. Harper sat across from him with her laptop open on her knees, translating a document for a new project. She was 24 then, newly promoted to a senior language specialist at the CIA, South Asia Division. Her father had been the one to introduce her to the work, not out of favoritism, but because he knew exactly how gifted his daughter was. James Sinclair was a legend in intelligence circles. 25 years in the field, a top cryptography expert, the man who could crack systems that entire teams of supercomputers couldn't break. He was quiet, sparing with words, but when he spoke, every sentence carried weight. He taught Harper that language wasn't just vocabulary and grammar. It was a door into the soul of an entire culture. "Sweetheart," her father said, his voice low and warm. "It's Sunday and you're still working?" "Urgent project, Dad." Harper smiled. "Besides, who says I don't like it? You're the one who gave me the workaholic gene." James Sinclair laughed, one of those rare smiles he saved for family. Then the doorbell rang, not once, but in a barrage of pounding, as if someone were trying to break the door down. James stood up, his expression changing in an instant. Harper recognized that look, the look of a man who already knew something was coming. "Harper," her father said, his voice strangely calm. "No matter what happens, remember one thing. I have never betrayed this country." "Dad, what are you saying?" The door burst open. Men in tactical vests flooded into the house, guns pointed straight at them. Her mother screamed from the kitchen. Penny shrieked and began to sob. Someone barked, "FBI! Don't move!" Harper was shoved to the floor, her hands yanked behind her back and cuffed. She turned her head and saw her father forced down by 2 large men, metal cuffs clamped tight around his wrists. His face was pressed against the wooden floor, but his eyes were on Harper, steady, unafraid. "James Sinclair, you're under arrest for treason and espionage on behalf of a foreign government." Harper wanted to scream that this had to be a mistake, that her father was the most loyal man she'd ever known, that he'd given 25 years of his life to the intelligence community, but her mouth went bitter and dry, and no words came out. They dragged her father away. James Sinclair didn't fight, didn't shout. He only turned his head back toward his family one last time and said 3 words. "I love you." Then he disappeared through the doorway. Her mother collapsed in the kitchen. Penny cried until her voice went hoarse. Harper stood there in the ransacked living room, watching strangers carry out box after box of documents. Every laptop, everything that could be connected to her father. That night, Harper turned on the television. Her father's face was on every channel, and beside it was the face of a man Harper recognized immediately. Bernard Kessler, the director of CIA counterintelligence, her father's direct superior. Kessler stood before a forest of microphones, his expression solemn, his voice filled with practiced grief. James Sinclair betrayed the trust of this agency and this country. He sold classified information to a foreign government for the past 5 years. This is one of the worst espionage cases in the history of the CIA. Harper stared at the screen, unable to believe what she was hearing. Kessler, the man her father had once called a trustworthy teammate, was on television calling him a traitor. 6 months later, Harper received a call from federal prison. Her father was dead in his cell. The official conclusion, suicide. Harper didn't believe it. She knew her father. James Sinclair was the strongest person she'd ever met. He'd once been tortured for 7 days in a foreign prison and hadn't given up a single word. He'd faced situations that would have driven ordinary people insane. A man like that didn't kill himself in a cell because of an accusation. He was murdered. Harper knew it in her bones, but she had no evidence, no power, nothing except the certainty that her father was innocent. She tried to investigate. She knocked on the doors of her father's former colleagues. She wrote to every human rights attorney she could find. She filed complaints with every agency that would take a letter. No one helped. And then she received her termination notice from the CIA. Reason: family association with a treason record, not eligible to continue employment in an intelligence agency. That day, Harper stood at the CIA gate, staring at the building where she'd given 5 years of her youth, and she understood one thing. The government her father had served for 25 years had betrayed him, and now they were throwing her away like trash. She looked up at the sky, thought of her father, and made a vow in her heart. One day, she would find the truth. One day, she would clear his name. One day, the real traitor would pay. But first, she had to survive. She had to take care of her mother. She had to take care of Penny. She didn't know that, only 3 months later, her mother wouldn't be there for her to take care of anymore. After her father was arrested, everything changed. Caroline Sinclair, the woman who had once been so strong that Harper believed nothing could ever knock her down, began to fracture piece by piece. With every passing day, Harper watched her mother shrink, grow smaller, like a candle burning from both ends. It started with sleepless nights. Her mother would sit in the living room until 3 or 4 in the morning, staring at her wedding photo with James. Then came the days she wouldn't leave the bed. Then came the half-eaten meals, the clipped answers, the empty eyes that looked straight through Harper as if she didn't exist. Harper tried to hold the family together. She worked at the CIA and took care of her mother and Penny at the same time. Every morning she got up at 5, made breakfast for Penny, took her to school, then rushed back home to check on her mother before going to work. Every night she came home late, cooked dinner, fed Penny, coaxed her to sleep, then sat beside her mother and tried to talk to a woman who no longer wanted to listen. "Mom, you've got to eat something," Harper said, sliding a bowl of porridge toward her. Caroline stared at the bowl, then at Harper, her eyes bloodshot from crying too much. "Your father is innocent," her mother said, her voice rough. "I know your father is innocent. I know too, Mom. I know. But nobody believes it." Caroline began to cry, tears running down her hollow cheeks. "The neighbors look at me like I'm a criminal. None of my friends call anymore. I hear them whisper behind my back. The traitor's wife, that's what they call me." Harper wrapped her arms around her, feeling her mother's thin body trembling in her embrace. She wanted to say everything would be all right, that she would find the truth, that her father would be cleared, but she couldn't promise what she wasn't sure she could deliver. The news of the suicide was the final blow that shattered the remains of their family. Caroline Sinclair didn't scream or cry when she heard the confirmation. She simply stood there with her eyes wide open, then slowly sank onto the floor. From that day on, her body still moved and breathed when Harper forced it, but her spirit had died alongside her husband. She had become a ghost in her own home, waiting for a dawn that would never come, not literally, but in every way that mattered. Her body still moved, still ate when Harper forced it, still breathed, but her spirit had died with her husband. 3 months after her father's death, Harper received her termination notice from the CIA. She stood at the gate, watching her employee badge being confiscated, watching old colleagues walk past without even looking at her. 5 years. 5 years she'd given that place. Nights without sleep translating documents. Times she'd put the job above everything. A Georgetown degree, a master's in linguistics, 6 languages, all of it turned meaningless because of 4 words. Family tied to treason. Harper went home that day and tried to hide the pain so her mother wouldn't worry. But her mother no longer had the ability to worry. A week after Harper was fired, she took a second job at a coffee shop to cover expenses. Her shift ended at 9 at night. She got home at 10. The house was dark. Harper opened the door and called for her mother. No answer. She called for Penny. Nothing. Then she heard it. Crying. Not ordinary crying. The screaming of a 5-year-old witnessing something no child should ever see. Harper ran up the stairs 2 steps at a time. She shoved open her mother's bedroom door, and her world stopped. Caroline Sinclair hung suspended in the middle of the room, a rope tied to the ceiling beam, her feet not touching the floor, her face purple, her eyes open and staring. Penny sat on the floor beneath her mother's feet, screaming until her voice broke. "Mom! Mom! Mom! Don't leave me!" Harper couldn't remember what happened next. She couldn't remember how she got her mother down, couldn't remember when she called for an ambulance, couldn't remember how she pulled Penny into her arms. She only remembered Penny's screams. Those screams haunted her every night, every time she closed her eyes, every time the world went quiet enough for memory to rise. And she remembered the moment the screaming stopped. Not because Penny calmed down, but because Penny stopped making sound at all. A 5-year-old child watched her mother die in front of her, and her mind decided silence was the only way to survive. From that day on, Penny didn't speak. Harper lost her father, lost her mother, lost her career, lost everything she'd ever built. She had only Penny left. A 5-year-old who didn't speak, didn't laugh, only drew pictures in black and gray. Harper sold the family house to pay debts and to have enough money to start over. She rented a small room in Maggie's boarding house in Queens. She applied everywhere, but nobody wanted to hire a former CIA employee who'd been fired for association with treason. In the end, she found the only job that didn't require a background check: waitressing. Harper Sinclair, a Georgetown graduate with a master's in linguistics, a former CIA specialist who spoke 6 languages, began her new life carrying plates and clearing tables. She didn't complain. She didn't indulge self-pity. She just worked. Every tip dollar, every extra shift, every insult she swallowed, all of it was for Penny. The doctors said Penny needed intensive treatment, psychotherapy, art therapy, continuous monitoring, $6,500 a month. Harper worked 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week, no days off, no vacations, no life of her own, only a life for Penny. Because if she lost her sister, she would have no reason left to continue. And now, sitting in a hospital at 3 a.m, watching her sister lie there with her arms wrapped in bandages, Harper wondered how much longer she could keep going. She needed $2,000 before 8 o'clock in the morning. She had 517, and she didn't know what to do. The clock on the wall read 3:47 in the morning when Harper's phone vibrated. She startled so hard she nearly dropped the old device. Penny was still asleep, her hand still gripping her sister's. Harper gently eased her fingers free and stepped into the hallway so she wouldn't wake her. Unknown number. No name. Harper hesitated for a second, then answered. Harper Sinclair. That voice. Low, cold, familiar. The voice of the man who had sent Rajesh Malhotra running out of the restaurant like he was being chased by ghosts only hours earlier. Mr. Thorne, Harper said, cautious. How'd you get my number? I'm Kian Thorne, Miss Sinclair, he said without a trace of apology. Finding a phone number is the easiest thing I can do. Harper didn't speak. Through the glass of the patient room, she looked at Penny lying there, small and breakable. What do you want? I know where you are, Kian said. Mount Sinai, pediatric emergency. Your sister, Penny Sinclair, 8 years old, admitted for self-inflicted injury. Harper's heart tightened. You're tracking me? I investigated you, Kian said plainly. There's a difference. What difference? It's still an invasion of privacy. The difference is I didn't do it to hurt you. His voice softened slightly. I have an offer, but not over the phone. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, I'll come to the hospital. I don't need your offer. You need $2,000 before 8, Kian said, and Harper went rigid. If you don't have it, your sister will be transferred to a public facility. 3-month waiting list. Overworked doctors. Pediatric psychiatric patients there don't get the care they need. Harper bit her lip until she tasted blood. You know a lot. I know enough, Kian said. Tomorrow, 8. Listen to me first, then decide. He hung up. Harper stood in the empty hospital corridor, staring at the dead black phone screen. She wanted to throw it against the wall, wanted to scream that she didn't need anyone's pity, wanted to say she could handle it on her own, but she couldn't. That was the truth, the brutal truth she had to face. 5 hours later, at exactly 8 a.m, Kian Thorne stepped into Penny's room. He wore a black suit, as if he'd just walked out of a high-level meeting. Declan O'Brien followed behind him, massive and silent as a shadow. Their presence made the night nurse glance twice. Harper stood up, placing herself between Kian and Penny's bed. My sister's sleeping. I know. Kian stopped a few steps away. I'm not here to bother her. I'm here to talk to you. Then talk. Kian studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod to Declan. The big man stepped outside, closed the door, and stood guard in the hall. I investigated you all night, Kian began, calm as if he were reading a financial report. Harper Sinclair, 27 years old, Georgetown University graduate, linguistics, valedictorian, master's in applied linguistics, completed in a 1.5 years instead of 2, recruited by the CIA immediately after graduation. 5 years as a language specialist, South Asia Division. Fluent in 6 languages: Hindi, Urdu, Mandarin, Arabic, Farsi, Russian. Outstanding performance. Nominated for promotion 3 times. Harper stood motionless, listening to him read her life like a file. 3 years ago. Kian continued, his voice dropping slightly. Your father, James Sinclair, CIA cryptography specialist for 25 years, was arrested for treason. 6 months later, he died in prison. Official ruling, suicide. Harper clenched her jaw. Your mother, Caroline Sinclair, committed suicide 3 months after that. Your sister, Penny, witnessed it and hasn't spoken since. You were fired by the CIA due to association with a treason family record. Since then, you've been waitressing to support your sister. You did a thorough job, Harper said, bitterness in her voice. I needed to know who I'm offering a partnership to, Kian said. Partnership? Harper let out a thin, humorless laugh. You're Mafia. I'm former intelligence. We don't have anything to partner on. You're former intelligence that the government threw away, Kian corrected. And I'm someone who can give you what the government took from you. What? Justice. 1 word, 1 syllable. But it made Harper stop. Kian moved toward the window and looked down at New York waking up below. Before we talk about that, let's talk about reality, he said, turning back to her. You need $2,000. I've already paid it. The hospital bill, the medication, your sister's treatment costs for the next 6 months. All of it. Harper stared at him. What did you do? I invested, Kian said evenly. I'm not asking for charity. Harper stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. I didn't ask you for anything. I don't need your pity. This isn't charity. Kian didn't retreat, meeting her with calm. And it isn't pity. I don't pity anyone. This is an investment, and I expect a return. What return? You. Kian said simply. I need a language specialist, someone who can translate international negotiations, analyze information, understand what other people think they're hiding. You're the best I've ever met. You want me to work for the Mafia. I want you to work for me, Kian corrected. $15,000 a month. 24/7 protection for you and your sister. Penny's treatment is included in the contract. Harper stood there, her thoughts spinning. $15,000 a month. 10 times what she made as a waitress. Enough to take care of Penny, enough to rent a decent apartment, enough to live like a human being again. But working for the Mafia? I need to think, Harper said, hoarse. You have time. Kian nodded. But before you decide, hear one more thing. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. I know your father is innocent, and I know who framed him. Harper went rigid. Tomorrow, same time, same place, Kian said, then turned toward the door. If you want the truth, come. He opened the door and walked out, Declan following. Harper stood alone in the patient room, watching the door close, listening to footsteps fade away. She turned back to Penny sleeping. Her sister, the only person she had left. Then she thought of her father. The man who died in prison with a treason conviction. The man she believed was innocent but couldn't prove it. Kian Thorne knew who had framed him, and he was offering to tell her. Harper sat back down beside Penny's bed, watching her sleep, and for the first time in 3 years, she saw a faint light at the end of the tunnel. Even if that light was coming from the hand of a Mafia boss. Harper brought Penny back to the boarding house that afternoon. The doctor discharged her earlier than expected, because the bill had been paid in full, including the next 6 months of treatment. Harper signed the paperwork with a trembling hand, the sensation strangely like signing an invisible contract with the devil. She hated the feeling. Hated that someone had paid for her sister without her consent. Hated that she now owed Kian Thorne, even though she'd never asked him for anything. Maggie was waiting at the door when they arrived. The 70-year-old woman with silver hair and kind eyes wrapped Penny in a tight hug, then looked at Harper with worry. Are you okay? She asked softly. Harper nodded, even though she wasn't. Not even close. Thank you for calling the ambulance, Harper said. If it hadn't been for you? Don't talk nonsense, Maggie waved her off. Penny's like a granddaughter to me. I did what needed to be done. Harper guided Penny into their small room. 15 square meters, 1 double bed, a small table, an old wardrobe. This was all she could afford on waitressing wages. Penny sat down in her familiar corner, where her paper and colored pencils were kept. She began to draw, the way she always did when she didn't know how to face the world. Black pencil, gray pencil, no other color. Penny drew a house with dark windows, drew a sky with no sun, drew human shapes with no faces. 36 months of shadows. 3 years of drawings like this. The doctors said it was how she expressed what was inside. Darkness, emptiness, no hope. Harper wanted to cry. She wanted to pull her sister into her arms and promise that everything would get better, but she couldn't promise what she didn't know was true. That night, after Penny fell asleep, Harper lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Her mind churned around Kean Thorne's offer. $15,000 a month, 24/7 protection. Penny's treatment. And most of all, he knew who had framed her father. But working for the Mafia, Harper thought of her father, James Sinclair, the man who had taught her everything about honor and principles. He used to say, "Sweetheart, there are lines you don't cross. No matter the circumstances, no matter how hard it gets, some things matter more than money and power." If he were still alive, what would he say if he knew his daughter was considering working for a Mafia boss? Harper rolled onto her side and looked at Penny sleeping beside her. Penny lay curled up, both arms wrapped around an old teddy bear her father had given her before he was arrested. Her father, the man who had given 25 years to the country, the man who had worked day and night to protect national security, the man who had taught Harper that serving your country was the highest honor. And what had the country done to him? Arrested him, called him a traitor, let him die in prison. The government her father served had betrayed him first. Bernard Kessler stood on television and called her father a spy. The CIA fired Harper for association with a treason family. No one listened to her defense. No one reopened the case. No one cared about the truth. They discarded her father, then they discarded her. So what did she still owe them? What principles did she still have to keep for people who had destroyed her family? Harper closed her eyes and felt tears soak into the pillow. She thought of late nights at the CIA, weekends sacrificed to finish projects, times she'd put the job above everything because she believed in the mission. All of it now meant nothing. She thought of months as a waitress, customers looking through her like an object, the insults, the moment she'd been forced onto her knees. And for what? Enough money to survive the day, but never enough to save her sister when it mattered. She thought of Penny, an 8-year-old who didn't speak, didn't laugh, who drew only in black. If she kept living like this, how long would it take before Penny got better? How long before Harper could afford the right treatment? How much longer would Penny have to live in a 15-square-meter room with a sister who couldn't give her a better life? And if Harper never learned the truth about her father, how would she live? Live with the knowledge that the man who destroyed him was still out there, still climbing higher inside the CIA, still called a hero while her father died branded a traitor? Harper opened her eyes and stared at the dark ceiling. Her father was a principled man, but he was also practical. He used to say, "Sweetheart, sometimes you have to choose your battles. Not everything is purely white or black. Sometimes you have to step into the gray to reach the goal." The gray. Kean Thorne was that gray. Harper didn't know if he was good or bad. She didn't know what trap might be hidden inside his offer. She didn't know what price she would have to pay. But she knew one thing. He had what she needed, money to save Penny, and the truth to clear her father's name. The government had betrayed her father first. Maybe it was time she chose a different side. Tomorrow, she would meet Kean Thorne, and she would listen to what he had to say about the man who had destroyed her family. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, Harper arrived at the coffee shop on the corner of 53rd and Madison. Kean Thorne was already there, seated at the last table by the window, with Declan standing beside him like a stone statue. On the table sat 2 cups of coffee, one black with no sugar, one a latte topped with whipped cream. He'd known what she drank. Harper sat down across from him and didn't touch the coffee. "Me being here doesn't mean I agree," she said flatly. "I know," Kean nodded, sliding a leather briefcase toward her. "Open it." Harper hesitated for a second, then opened the case. Inside was a thick file, photographs, copied emails, documents stamped with CIA classification markings. "Bernard Kessler," Kean said, his voice low. "Born in 1962. Joined the CIA in 1985. Currently the Deputy Director of the United States Central Intelligence Agency." Harper looked at the first photograph. A familiar face. The face she'd seen on television 3 years ago, standing before a forest of microphones, calling her father a traitor. "I know who he is," Harper said, her voice hard. "He was my father's boss, the one who stood up and accused my father in public." "He's more than that," Kian said, turning to the next page. "Kessler is the one who created the fabricated evidence used to accuse your father. He stole your father's identity and used it to cover up his own illegal operation." Harper went still. "What operation?" "Human trafficking," Kian replied evenly. "Kessler has been working with Rajesh Malhotra for more than 10 years. Their network moves women and children from South Asia into Europe and the United States. Rajesh handles the source. Kessler handles the receiving end. He uses his position inside the CIA to protect the shipments, erase traces, and remove anyone who gets in the way." "My father," Harper whispered. "Your father found something." Kian nodded. 3 years ago, James Sinclair was investigating a chain of suspicious transactions. He nearly uncovered the truth. Kessler knew, and he moved first. Harper stared down at the file. Emails between Kessler and an anonymous address. Records of transfers routed through offshore accounts. Candid photographs of Kessler meeting Rajesh in Mumbai. "How'd you get these?" Harper asked. "I've got people everywhere," Kian said simply. "The price of power is knowing everything." Harper kept turning pages, until one photograph made her stop. Her father, James Sinclair, in a suit, standing in front of the CIA building, smiling at colleagues. The picture had been taken a week before his arrest. Harper's hand trembled. "Your father didn't kill himself," Kian said, his voice a shade softer. "Kessler arranged it. He's got people inside the prison." Harper closed her eyes. She'd known it. She'd suspected it for 3 years. But hearing someone confirm it still felt like her heart was being squeezed tight in a fist. "Why are you telling me this?" Harper opened her eyes and looked at Kian. "Why do you care about clearing my father's name?" "I don't care about clearing anyone," Kian said bluntly. "I care about bringing Kessler and Rajesh down. They've been a problem for me for too long. Rajesh wants to use my network to expand his operation. Kessler wants me under his control. Both of them are going to pay. And I'm your tool." "You're my partner," Kian corrected. "I need someone with your skills. Language, analysis, the ability to read people. You need someone with my resources. Money, power, information. We've both got what the other needs." Harper looked down at the file, then up at Kian. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I've got conditions. Say them." "First, Penny's not involved. My sister doesn't know anything about my work. She's protected, but she's not pulled into anything." "Agreed." "Second, I don't do anything that harms innocent people. I can translate, analyze, gather information. But I don't kill, I don't torture, I don't take part in things I can't live with." Kian watched her for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed." "Third," Harper said, her voice tightening, "when we bring Kessler down, I want my father's name officially cleared. Not in the shadows. Officially. In the press. In front of the public." Kian fell silent. She knew this was the hardest condition. An official exoneration meant Kessler would have to be tried in the open. It meant the FBI would have to get involved. It meant something far more complicated than simply taking someone down in the dark. "I'll do what I can," Kian said at last. "But I won't promise what I'm not sure I can deliver." Harper nodded. It was the most honest answer she could expect from a Mafia boss. "So," Kian leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto hers, "do you want justice, or do you want to keep carrying plates?" Harper looked at the file, looked at her father's face in that photograph, looked at the evidence of the man who'd destroyed her family. Then she lifted her gaze to Kian Thorne. "When do I start?" 3 months passed like a dream. Harper stood by the window of the new apartment, looking down at Central Park, stretching out below. A penthouse on the 32nd floor of the Rushmore. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a modern kitchen with a marble island. 3 months ago, she'd been living in a 15-square-meter room in Queens. Now she stood here, watching the city as if it were her own private oasis. Laughter drifted from the living room. Harper turned, and her heart almost stopped. Penny was laughing. Her little sister sat on the rug with colored pencils scattered around her, drawing something on a fresh pad of paper. Dr. Thompson, the top child psychologist in New York that Kian had arranged, sat beside her, pointing at the picture and saying something that made Penny laugh again. 3 years. 3 years Harper hadn't heard that sound. 3 years she'd believed maybe Penny would never laugh again. And now, inside this safe apartment, with the best doctor, with a steady life, Penny was laughing. Harper turned her face away and blinked hard to stop the tears. Her new life had begun the day she said yes to Kian Thorne. In the very first week, she and Penny were moved into this apartment. 2 guards on constant duty, one in the lobby, one on the floor, security cameras everywhere. Penny had a private nanny, Mrs. Montgomery, a 50-year-old woman with experience caring for children with special needs. Every morning, Harper went to the offices of Thorne Corporation on the 45th floor of the Empire State Building. From the outside, it was a legitimate international investment firm with hundreds of employees. On the inside, it was the command center of the Thorne Syndicate. Harper's work was translation and analysis, negotiations with Middle Eastern partners, meetings with Asian investors, video calls with contacts in Russia and Pakistan. In the first week, Kian sat in the conference room and watched her work with a group of businessmen from Dubai. The negotiation lasted 4 hours, tense and intricate. The partners spoke Arabic among themselves, assuming no one understood. They discussed tactics, the real price they were willing to accept, the weakness they'd noticed on Thorne's side. Harper translated the meeting the way she always did, but after the partners left, she turned to Kian and summarized everything they'd said privately to each other. Kian looked at her, surprise clearly visible in his intense look. "You caught all of that? They think I'm just the interpreter." Harper shrugged. People underestimate interpreters. From then on, Kian started bringing her into more important meetings. In the 3rd week, a Russian partner came to New York, a negotiation about a shipping deal through the port of Vladivostok. The Russians brought their own interpreter, a middle-aged man with a cold expression. Harper recognized it immediately. The way the man translated, the way he left out certain details, the way he added words the Russians hadn't said. He was manipulating the negotiation. She didn't say anything during the meeting, but after the Russians left, she placed a set of notes in front of Kian. What the interpreter had said, what had actually been said, and the difference between the two. Kian read it and looked up at her. "You're a lot better than I thought." Harper didn't know why that sentence warmed her. 2 months later, she was no longer only an interpreter. She helped analyze information, assess partners, even weigh in on strategy. Kian began asking for her opinion on major decisions. One evening, when the office had emptied out and only Kian and Harper remained, reviewing the dossier of a new deal, he said suddenly, "The CIA wasted you." Harper looked up. "Why'd you say that?" "They had you translating." "Only translating." Kian shook his head. "With your analytical ability, you should have been much higher. They either didn't see it, or they kept you down on purpose." Harper didn't speak. She'd thought about it many times. Why she'd never been promoted, despite outstanding evaluations. Why she'd always been kept in an interpreter's chair when she could do more. Maybe because she was a woman. Maybe because she was too young. Or maybe because someone had deliberately blocked her path. Kessler. The name rose in Harper's mind again. "Have we made any progress on Kessler?" she asked. Kian nodded. "Yes, but it'll take time. He's careful. Rajesh is too. We need proof they can't deny before we move." Harper nodded. She understood. This wasn't a game you could rush, but with every day that passed, she was one day closer to justice for her father. That night, when Harper got home, Penny ran to her and wrapped her arms around her. In her hands was a new drawing. Harper looked down, and her throat tightened. The picture had color. For the first time in 3 years, Penny had drawn in color. A blue sky, a yellow sun. 2 figures standing side by side, one big and one small, both smiling. Harper held her sister close, and this time she didn't try to hide her tears. Harper found the file on a Friday afternoon. She'd been searching for documents for the next week's meeting in the office archive when her fingers brushed a familiar leather case, the one Kian had handed her on the first day, with the dossier on Kessler and Rajesh inside. But it didn't hold only that. Harper turned the pages one by one, and the blood in her body seemed to congeal. Penny's medical records, every diagnosis, every appointment, every medication her sister took, Dr. Thompson's reports on treatment progress, even the drawings Penny made during therapy sessions, Harper's school records from Georgetown, her performance evaluations from the CIA, a list of every place she'd lived over the past 10 years, every job she'd held, everyone she'd known. Kian hadn't just investigated her. He'd dissected her life down to the smallest detail. Harper stood up, her hands shaking with anger. She grabbed the file, walked straight to Kian's office, and pushed the door open without knocking. Kian sat behind his desk, his dark, shadowed gaze lifting to her. Declan stood to the side, his hand going to his gun when he saw her storm in, but Kian motioned for him to stop. Harper threw the file onto the desk. "Explain." Kian looked at the file, then at her. No surprise, no excuse, just calm. "You found it." "My sister's medical records," Harper said, her voice trembling with restraint. "Her therapy drawings. The most private pieces of an 8-year-old child's trauma. What right do you have?" "I needed to know." "Needed to know what?" "Needed to know what she draws when she has nightmares. Needed to know she's afraid of the dark because she watched our mother die in a dark room." Harper stepped forward, her eyes burning. "You said I'm your partner. You said Penny wouldn't be pulled into this. But you violated her privacy without even asking me one question." Kian rose slowly. Declan looked from one to the other, then quietly left the office, closing the door behind him. "You've got every right to be angry," Kian said, his voice low. "But let me explain." "Explain what? That you don't trust me? That you need to know everything so you can control me? To protect you," Kian cut in. "And to protect Penny." Harper stopped, but the anger still boiled in her chest. Kian walked to the window and looked down at the city. 3 months ago, when I decided to offer you work, I needed to know everything, not to control you, to understand. He turned back to Harper. "You've got a weakness. Penny is your biggest weakness. If an enemy learns about her, they'll use her to get to you. I needed to know her condition, so I could protect her the right way. You could have asked me. Would you have told me everything?" Kian asked. "Would you have told me Penny is afraid of the color red because that's the color of the blood on her hands when she tried to wake your mother? Would you have told me she has nightmares every Tuesday night because that's the day your mother died? Would you have admitted the most painful details about your little sister to a stranger?" Harper fell silent. She didn't know what to say. Kian exhaled and went back to the desk, opened a drawer, and took out an old photograph. He looked at it for a moment, then handed it to Harper. The photo showed a young Indian woman, maybe in her 20s, with large, sorrowful eyes and a tight, uncertain smile. She held a little boy of about 5 in her arms. "My mother," Kian said, his voice quieter. "Ananya. She was born in Mumbai, in the Dharavi slum. At 16, she was hired as a housemaid in a wealthy family's home. At 18, she met my father." Harper looked at the photo, then back at Kian. "My father was Patrick Thorne," Kian said, his voice turning cold. "The boss of the Thorne syndicate before me. He went to Mumbai for business, saw my mother, and wanted her. Not loved her. Wanted her. Like a thing." Kian went silent for a moment, then continued. "He brought her to America. She didn't have a choice. No money, no family, no English. He kept her like a bird in a cage. Pretty to look at, but never allowed to fly." Harper felt something tighten in her chest. "My mother taught me Hindi," Kian said, his voice softening slightly. "She told me about Mumbai, about the streets she used to walk, about the scent of jasmine in the mornings. She was the only person who ever loved me without conditions." He paused, and Harper saw something shift in those storm-gray eyes. Pain. Old pain that had never truly healed. "When I was 15, my mother died. Officially, it was illness, but I knew the truth. She died of loneliness, of being trapped in a big house with a husband who didn't love her, of having no one to talk to, of having no one who truly saw her." Kian turned to face Harper. "I hate Rajesh because he reminds me of my father. The way he looked at you that night, like you were an object, like you weren't human. That's how my father looked at my mother for 20 years. Harper stood there holding the photograph and felt her anger slowly begin to dissolve. "I investigated you because I needed to know," Kian said. "But I'm keeping Penny safe because I don't want anyone to lose the person they love the way I lost my mother. You can be angry at me, but don't doubt that I'll protect your sister at any cost." Harper looked at the photo again. The woman with the sad eyes, the child in her arms. She handed it back to Kian. "Next time," Harper said, her voice softer, Ask me first. Kian took the photo, and for the first time, Harper saw him smile. Not the cold smile of a mafia boss, the smile of a man who'd just been understood. Agreed. A week after the confrontation in his office, Harper came home earlier than usual. She opened the apartment door, expecting to hear Penny come running the way she always did. But the place was quiet. Mrs. Montgomery, the nanny, sat in the living room with a book in her hands. "Where's Penny?" Harper asked. "In her room, drawing." Mrs. Montgomery smiled. "She's been so happy today. She's been drawing all afternoon." Harper nodded and walked lightly toward Penny's bedroom. She eased the door open and looked in. Penny sat on the floor with colored pencils and paper spread around her. She was focused on coloring a picture, her tongue sticking out slightly with concentration. Harper stayed at the doorway, not wanting to startle her. Then she saw the drawing. 3 people standing side by side. A brown-haired woman, a small child, and a tall man with dark hair and gray eyes. Harper stepped into the room and knelt beside her sister. "Penny, that's beautiful," she said gently. "Who is this?" Penny looked up at her sister, then pointed to each person in the picture. She pointed to the woman, then pointed to Harper. She pointed to the child, then pointed to herself. She pointed to the man. Harper waited. Penny opened her mouth, and though no sound came out, her lips moved, clear as day. Sad eyes. Harper's heart tightened. 3 years. For 3 years, Penny had drawn only 2 people in family pictures, Harper and herself. Sometimes there were faint shadow shapes of their parents in the corner, like ghosts. But never, not once, had she drawn a stranger into their picture. And now Kian Thorne stood beside them, with eyes Penny called sad. "Penny," Harper asked, forcing her voice to stay even. "Have you met this man before?" Penny nodded, then lifted both hands, spreading 5 fingers, then adding 3 more. 8 times. Harper stood, walked back into the living room, and found Mrs. Montgomery. "Mrs. Montgomery, has Mr. Thorne been coming here to see Penny?" The nanny looked up, a little surprised. "Yes, ma'am. He's come a few times when you were at work. I assumed you knew. What did he do?" "He read to Penny." Mrs. Montgomery smiled. "He brought picture books, and he sat with her for an hour at a time. Penny really likes him. It's the first time I've ever seen her choose to go close to anyone besides you." Harper stood there, not knowing what she was supposed to feel. Anger that Kian had been seeing her sister without telling her, or something softer, something that ached, because he'd taken time for the child Harper loved most in the world. That night, Harper called Kian. "You're home early today." His voice was calm as always. "I saw Penny's drawing." Silence for a moment. "Are you angry?" Harper thought about that question. She should be. This was another time Kian had done something without asking her first. But the drawing, and the way Penny had placed him beside them as if he belonged there. "Why did you go?" Harper asked instead of answering. "Because Penny reminds me of my mother," Kian said, his voice softer. "She was silent in her last years too. She didn't speak to anyone. I wish someone had sat with her, read to her, made her feel she wasn't alone." Harper felt her eyes burn. "Can you come to the office?" Kian asked. "There's something I want to say to you in person." Half an hour later, Harper sat in Kian's office. The city at night glittered through the glass. Declan had gone home, leaving only the 2 of them. "Penny cried for Mom every night in the first year," Harper began, not knowing why she was telling him. "She didn't speak during the day, but at night, in her sleep, she screamed, calling for Mom, begging her not to go. I lay beside her, held her, and all I could do was cry with her." Kian listened without interrupting. "There were nights I wanted to quit," Harper continued, her voice shaking. "Wanted to stop trying, wanted to stop pretending I was strong. But then morning came. Penny woke up, looked at me with those eyes, and I knew I couldn't quit, because she's all I've got left." Tears ran down Harper's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't try to hide them. Kian stood and walked over to her. He sat in the chair beside her, silent. Then he held out his hand. He didn't say anything. He only offered it, palm up, waiting. Harper looked at that hand, the hand of a mafia boss, the hand that had done things she didn't want to know about, but also the hand that had turned pages of picture books for her sister. She placed her hand in his. Kian's fingers closed around hers, gentle, warm. They sat there in silence, watching the city at night, hand in hand. No one spoke. No one had to. Some things didn't need words to be understood. 2 weeks after the night they held hands, the peace was shattered. Harper was sitting in her office, analyzing an audio recording of a negotiation in Urdu, when Declan stepped in with a tight expression. "You need to see the boss. Right now." Harper rose and followed Declan to Kian's office, and when she walked in, she saw Kian standing in front of a large screen, watching security camera footage. "Rajesh Malhotra is back in New York," Kian said without turning around. "He flew in from Dubai yesterday, entered the US, on a diplomatic visa." Harper went still. "A diplomatic visa?" "He isn't a diplomat." "Correct." Kian turned to look at her, his eyes clouded, looking than usual. "Kessler arranged it. The deputy director of the CIA has enough power to do that." On the screen, Harper saw the familiar face of Rajesh Malhotra, stepping out at JFK. 45 years old, heavy, dripping with gold, that greasy smile, the man who'd humiliated her that night, the man working with Kessler in a trafficking pipeline. "Is he here because of us?" Harper asked. "He's here because of you," Kian said flatly. "Rajesh hasn't forgotten what happened that night. He lost face, lost his deal with me. A man like him doesn't accept being put in his place by a waitress." Harper bit her lip. She'd known this day would come. She'd known Rajesh wasn't the kind of man who let things go. "There's more." Kian pressed a button and switched to another image. "My people spotted him meeting a woman in Brooklyn last night." On the screen was Brittany Cole. Harper recognized her instantly. The cheap dyed blonde hair, the fake smile, the former co-worker who'd looked thrilled when Harper was fired. "What's Brittany doing with Rajesh?" "Selling information," Kian said. "About you, about Penny, about where you used to live. Maggie's boarding house, Penny's old school, the hospital where she was treated. Everything she knows." Harper felt the blood in her body turn cold. "Penny," she whispered. "I doubled the security," Kian said quickly. "The apartment's safe. Rajesh doesn't know the new address. But she knows you worked at the Meridian. She knows you know Walt. She knows you're close to Maggie." Harper thought of Maggie, the kind woman who'd let her fall behind on rent. Thought of Walt, the old chef who'd pressed $500 into her hand from money he'd been saving. "Are they in danger?" "I've put people on them." Kian nodded. "But you need to see this." He handed Harper an envelope. She opened it, and her heart nearly stopped. Inside was a photograph. Penny walking on the sidewalk with Mrs. Montgomery. Taken from a distance but clear enough to recognize Penny's face. On the back of the photo was a handwritten line in Hindi. "I know where the girl is." Harper trembled, nearly dropping it. "When?" she asked, her voice rough. "Yesterday. Delivered to the office." Kian stepped closer. "This is a warning. Rajesh wants you to know he can reach Penny anytime he wants." Harper closed her eyes, trying to hold down the panic rising in her chest. That evening she went home early. Penny ran out and hugged her the way she always did, and Harper held her tighter than usual, longer than usual. "Sis, look at my drawing." Penny tugged her into the room and pulled out a new picture. Harper looked, and her blood seemed to freeze. The drawing showed a man, heavy, wearing a lot of gold bracelets on his wrists. A wide smile, but eyes that were black and cold. Penny had shaded around the man in red and black, like a dark halo. "Who is this, Penny?" Harper asked, forcing her voice to stay calm. Penny looked at the picture, then at her sister, and her lips shaped the words, "The scary man. In my dream." Harper shuddered. Penny had never met Rajesh. She'd never seen him, but the drawing captured him with terrifying accuracy. The weight, the gold, the oily smile. Dr. Thompson had said Penny had strong intuition, that traumatized children often developed a sense for danger that ran deeper than most adults, like a survival mechanism buried in the subconscious. Her little sister was sensing the threat, even if she didn't know where it was coming from. Harper pulled Penny into her arms and kissed her hair. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. "I'll protect you, I promise." That night, after Penny was asleep, Harper called Kian. "We need to act," she said, her voice hard. "I can't let Penny live in fear." "I know," Kian replied. "I've got a plan." "What plan?" "In 2 weeks, I'm hosting Thorne Corporation's annual charity gala. The guests will be the most important people in the city, including officials and the FBI. Kian paused. Rajesh will want to come to rebuild ties with me. He needs my network to expand his business. And if Rajesh comes, Kessler will come too. Harper understood immediately. You want to lure them both into a trap. Yes, Kian said, and I need you there. Not as an interpreter. As my partner. Harper thought of Rajesh, thought of Kessler, thought of the man who'd killed her father, and the man who'd humiliated her that night. I'll be there, she said. Harper. Kian's voice softened. After that night, everything will change. You may not be able to go back to a normal life. Harper stared into the dark of her room and thought of Penny sleeping in the next room. I don't have a normal life, she said. 3 years ago, the day my father was arrested, I lost normal. Now I just want back what was stolen. Kian was silent for a moment. 2 weeks, he said. Be ready. The night of Thorn Corporation's annual charity gala glittered like a dream. The plaza became a palace of light, with thousands of candles, enormous crystal chandeliers, and fresh flower arrangements imported from the Netherlands. 300 guests filled the room. The most powerful faces in New York. Politicians, billionaires, Hollywood stars, and high-ranking officials from every federal agency. This wasn't just a charity event. It was a stage where Kian Thorne showed the world his legitimate power. Harper stood in front of the mirror in the VIP dressing room and barely recognized herself. A floor-length black gown, cut low across the back with tasteful precision, fitted close without being vulgar. Her hair was swept up in an elegant updo, baring her pale throat and a pair of small diamond earrings. Her makeup was soft, just enough to bring out the green of her eyes and the fine lines of her face. She was no longer the gaunt waitress with worn heels. She was Harper Sinclair, language advisor for Thorn Corporation. The door opened. Kian stepped in. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his hair neatly combed, and for the first time Harper realized how striking he was when he wasn't standing in cold silence threatening someone. Kian stopped when he saw her. His smoky, intense gaze moved over her face, over the dress, then returned to her eyes. You're beautiful, he said simply. Harper felt heat rise in her cheeks. Thank you. Are you ready? Harper drew a deep breath. I'm ready. They entered the grand ballroom together. Kian placed a light hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. Eyes turned toward them, curious about the woman at Thorne's side. Harper kept her spine straight and her face calm, the way she used to at diplomatic receptions back at the CIA. She watched everything, the exits, the positions of Declan and the security team, the familiar faces scattered in the crowd. An hour after the gala began, Rajesh Malhotra appeared. Harper spotted him from across the room. The same heavy build, the same layers of gold, the same oily grin as if the world owed him something. He walked into the ballroom like he was the most important guest in it, with Vikram Shah trailing behind. Kian's hand tightened slightly against Harper's. He's here. I see him. Rajesh scanned the room, searching for Kian. When he found him, he spread a grin so wide Harper felt sick. But then Harper saw who was walking with Rajesh, and her world stopped. Bernard Kessler, 59 years old, silver hair cut close and neat, a sharp angled face with ice-cold blue eyes, a costly gray suit, a CIA lapel pin worn like a declaration of authority. Harper felt the blood in her body turn to ice. 3 years. 3 years since she'd seen that face on television, standing before a forest of microphones, calling her father a traitor. 3 years of dreaming about the moment she would face him, imagining what she would say, what she would do. And now he was here, less than 20 meters away. The man who framed her father, the man who ensured her father died in prison, the man who destroyed her family. Harper's hand began to shake. Kian noticed instantly. He shifted, blocking part of her view, and took her hand. Harper, his voice was low, meant only for her. Look at me. Harper lifted her gaze and met his steadfast and reassuring expression. You're not alone, Kian said. I'm here. Declan's here. The FBI is here. Tonight he'll pay, but you need to stay calm. Harper swallowed hard and nodded. She squeezed Kian's hand, using the warmth of his palm to anchor herself to the present. Rajesh and Kessler were moving toward them. Mr. Thorne. Rajesh opened his arms as if greeting an old friend. What an honor to be invited to such a wonderful party. Kian didn't smile. Mr. Malhotra. Mr. Kessler. I don't believe we've met. Bernard Kessler, Kessler said as he shook Kian's hand, his voice professionally cold. Deputy Director of the CIA. Mr. Malhotra is a longtime business partner of the agency on South Asia development projects. Harper almost laughed. Business partner. As if trafficking were legitimate business. Then Kessler turned to look at her. Those icy blue eyes settled on Harper's face. 1 second. 2. She saw the faint frown, the slight tilt of his head, the look of a man trying to place a memory. "Excuse me," Kessler said. "Have we met before?" Harper felt her heart hammer like war drums. She had to answer. She had to say something, but her mouth was bitter and dry. "This is Harper Sinclair," Kian answered for her, his tone effortless. "My language advisor." Kessler froze. Harper saw the exact moment he understood. The name Sinclair hit his mind like a bullet. His blue eyes widened, then narrowed. His face hardened as a professional mask slid back into place to hide his shock. "Sinclair," Kessler repeated, tasting the word. "Are you related to James Sinclair?" Harper looked straight into his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, she faced her enemy without lowering her head. "He was my father." Silence. Rajesh looked from Harper to Kessler, not understanding what was happening. Vikram stood rigid. Kessler didn't blink. Those cold blue eyes measured Harper like he was calculating every possible outcome. Then he smiled. The smile Harper had seen on television 3 years ago. The smile of a man who believed he was untouchable. "How interesting," Kessler said. "James Sinclair's daughter working for Mr. Thorne. The world is a small place." Harper didn't smile back. "It is," she said, her voice so steady it surprised even her. "The world is very small. Mr. Kessler is going to realize that soon." Half an hour after that first encounter, Rajesh Malhotra found Harper standing alone beside the drinks table. Kian was speaking with a group of Japanese businessmen in the corner of the room, and Rajesh saw his opening. He walked over, with Vikram trailing behind like a loyal tail. "Look at this," Rajesh said in Hindi, his voice dripping with contempt. "That scrawny waitress from that night. Now she's wearing a pretty dress and diamonds. Is it good, sleeping with the boss?" Vikram snickered. "She must be really good to climb that high. That's poor white girls for you. That's all they've got to sell." Harper didn't turn her head. She stood there with a champagne flute in her hand, staring straight ahead. "I'm telling you," Rajesh continued, moving closer, his alcohol-heavy breath brushing the back of Harper's neck. "No matter what you wear, no matter what you put on, you're still a servant. You were born to kneel. That's your fate." Harper set the champagne down on the table. She turned and faced Rajesh. Then she opened her mouth and spoke in Hindi. Perfect. Smooth. In the refined Lucknow accent reserved for India's old aristocratic families, the kind of voice shaped in the best private schools, steeped in classical Urdu poetry, and used to looking at men like Rajesh as nothing but newly rich, vulgar upstarts. "Mr. Malhotra," Harper said, each word falling like ice. "You should be more careful about what you say. Last time you thought I didn't understand. This time, I have an audio recording." Rajesh froze. The color drained from his face like water down a drain. Vikram stood there with his mouth hanging open, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You," Rajesh stammered. "You speak Hindi?" "I speak 6 languages, Mr. Malhotra." Harper smiled, but the smile was sharp as a blade. "And I've recorded every conversation you've had with Kessler for the past 3 months. Every agreement, every number, every name." Rajesh stepped back. Then another step. At that exact moment, the lights in the ballroom went out. A murmur rose in surprise. Then the enormous screen behind the stage lit up. Kian Thorne stood on the stage with a microphone in his hand. "Distinguished guests," his voice carried through the hall. "I'd like to take a few minutes to share something special. Tonight, we have 2 very special guests, Mr. Rajesh Malhotra and Mr. Rard Dai, Bernard Kessler." On the screen, photos of Rajesh and Kessler appeared. "Mr. Malhotra is a well-known businessman from Mumbai," Kian continued, calm as if he were reading an annual report. "He specializes in transport and logistics, but there's a branch of business he forgot to include in his resume." The screen shifted to covert photographs. Women and children crammed into dark shipping containers, faces hollowed out by fear. "Human trafficking," Kian said. "More than 2,000 women and children over the past 10 years. From Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar. Sold into Europe and the United States." A low wave of whispering swept through the crowd. Rajesh stood in the middle of the room, his face white as a corpse. And Mr. Kessler. Kian turned toward the CIA deputy director, the protector of this pipeline, using his authority inside the CIA to cover every trace. The screen displayed emails from Kessler's address, sent to Rajesh, discussing shipments, drop points, payments. But that's not all, Kian said. 3 years ago, a CIA cryptography specialist named James Sinclair discovered this operation. He nearly uncovered the truth. And what did Kessler do? The screen switched to a photograph of Harper's father, James Sinclair in a suit, standing in front of the CIA building, smiling. Kessler framed him, Kian said, his voice dropping. Fabricated evidence, turned a hero into a traitor. And when James Sinclair still didn't break in prison, Kessler arranged for him to die. The ballroom went silent as paper. Harper stood in the crowd with tears streaming down her face. She stared at her father's face on the screen, the man who'd lost his life for trying to do the right thing. FBI, Kian said, and as if the word itself was a signal, the ballroom doors burst open. Dozens of FBI agents rushed in, black jackets, guns drawn. Bernard Kessler, Rajesh Malhotra. One agent shouted, "You are under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, and murder." Kessler tried to run, but 2 agents cut him off. Handcuffs clamped around his wrists. Rajesh didn't even get the chance. Vikram tried to blend into the panicked crowd, but Declan's hand clamped onto his shoulder like a vice before he could reach the exit. Near the service entrance, Brittany Cole was led out in handcuffs by 2 female agents, her face pale, as she realized that her petty spite had led her into a federal conspiracy. Rajesh stood alone as agents forced him down to the floor. Past Rajesh on the floor in cuffs, straight to Kessler. The man who'd killed her father looked at her with those icy blue eyes, but now there was something in them Harper had never seen before. Fear. "You don't know anything," Kessler hissed through clenched teeth. "Your father was a traitor." The evidence was clear. Harper stopped in front of him. She looked directly into his eyes, unblinking, steady. "My father was a hero," she said, her voice hard as steel. "He found you. He wanted to expose you, and you killed him for it." Kessler didn't answer. "You're going to die in prison," Harper continued, every word falling like a sentence. "Just like you made my father die. But there's one difference." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a whisper meant only for Kessler. "My father died with honor. You'll die with the shame of being a trafficker and a murderer. History will remember you that way. Forever." The agents pulled Kessler away. He turned his head to glare at Harper one last time, blue eyes full of hate. Harper didn't watch him go. She turned, and Kian was there, waiting. He didn't speak. He only opened his arms. Harper stepped into them, pressed her face to his chest, and cried. She cried for her father. She cried for her mother. She cried for 3 years of pain. She cried because at last, justice had been done. Kian held her, one hand smoothing her hair, his mouth close to her ear. "You did it. Your father can rest now." 2 weeks after that fateful night, Harper stood in the grand auditorium at CIA headquarters in Langley. She wore a black dress, her hair down, her hand gripping pennies tightly. Her little sister stood beside her, setting foot for the first time in the place where their father had worked for 25 years. The director of the CIA stood at the podium, his formal voice carrying through the hall. "Today, we officially exonerate James Sinclair," he said. "After a comprehensive investigation, we confirm that Mr. Sinclair was completely innocent. He was the victim of a framing conspiracy led by Bernard Kessler, who abused his position to conceal his own crimes." Harper heard every word, and tears slid quietly down her cheeks. "James Sinclair was not a traitor," the director continued. "He was a hero. He uncovered a human trafficking operation and tried to expose it. He gave his life for the truth. A medal was brought forward, the Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal, the highest honor the CIA could bestow. Harper stepped up to accept it on her father's behalf. She held the medal in her hands, heavy but somehow warm. "Thank you," she said into the microphone, her voice trembling but steady. "My father deserved to be remembered as a good man, a good father, a good citizen. Today, his honor has finally been returned to him." That afternoon, Harper took Penny to the cemetery. Their father's grave and their mother's grave lay side by side beneath the branches of an old oak tree. Harper had replaced her father's headstone. No longer the cold, simple line of, James Sinclair. But now, James Sinclair, loving father, devoted husband, quiet hero. Harper knelt and laid a bouquet of white flowers on her father's grave. "I did it, Dad," she whispered. "You've been cleared. Kessler will pay. You can rest now." Penny stood beside her, looking down at the two graves. She was still silent, as she'd been for 3 years. Then something shifted. Penny bent down and touched their mother's headstone. Her lips moved, and for the first time in 3 years, a sound came out. "Sis." One word, just one word, but it made Harper freeze. She turned to her sister. Penny was looking at her, eyes clear, and her lips moved again. "Sis." Harper pulled her into a fierce embrace and sobbed. Since that fateful night, she'd waited for this moment. 3 years she'd prayed every night that Penny would speak again. "Baby," Harper cried, holding her so tightly she was afraid Penny might disappear. "I'm here. I'm always here." Penny hugged her back, and even though she didn't say anything else, Harper knew this was the beginning. The wall Penny had built around herself for 3 years was finally starting to crack. 6 months later, Harper's life had changed completely. She was no longer an interpreter. She was the Director of Security and Information at Thorne Corporation, with her own office on the 45th floor and a team of analysts reporting to her. Her salary was 10 times what she'd ever made as a waitress. Penny was 9, in 3rd grade at one of the best private schools in New York. She still didn't talk much, but every day she spoke a little more. Dr. Thompson called it extraordinary progress. On Sunday morning, the penthouse was filled with sunlight. Harper stood in the kitchen making pancakes from her mother's recipe. The smell of butter and sugar warmed the entire apartment. Kian sat at the dining table reading the newspaper, a steaming cup of black coffee beside him. He wore a white shirt with the top button undone, more relaxed than Harper had ever seen him. Penny sat on the living room rug, colored pencils scattered around her, working on a new drawing. Declan sat beside her, huge and silent as a statue, but his eyes were gentle as he watched the child draw. "Sis, look at my picture." Penny ran over, holding it up. Harper looked, and her heart warmed. 4 people stood together in front of a house. Harper with brown hair, Penny, tiny, Kian, tall, with unwavering, steel-colored stare, and Declan, big as a bear, standing beside them. For the first time, Penny had drawn 4 people in her family picture. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Harper bent to kiss Penny's forehead. "It's beautiful." Kian looked up from the paper at the drawing, then at Harper. He didn't say anything, but the corner of his mouth lifted into a faint smile. That afternoon, Harper went to the cemetery alone. She sat beside her mother's grave and laid fresh flowers on the soil. "Mom," Harper said softly, "I want to tell you about my life." She looked up at the blue sky where white clouds drifted slowly. "Penny's okay, Mom. She's starting to talk again. She laughs more. She draws in color." Harper smiled. "I think you'd like seeing her now." She paused, thinking of Kian, of Declan, of the warm penthouse on Sunday mornings. "And I'm okay too, Mom. I found a good job. I found a place where I belong." Tears rolled down Harper's cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I found a family, Mom. Not to replace you and Dad. No one can replace you. But I found people to love, and people who love me." Harper rested her hand on the headstone, feeling the cold stone beneath her palm. "You can rest now. Dad can too. I promise I'll take care of Penny. I promise I'll live a happy life, because that's what you and Dad always wanted for me." She stood, looked at the 2 graves one last time, then turned and walked away. In the distance, Kian was waiting by the car. Penny sat inside, waving through the window. Harper walked toward them, toward her new family. 3 years ago, Harper Sinclair lost everything. Her father died in prison, branded as a traitor. Her mother took her own life in despair. Her career collapsed. Her little sister went silent. Harper thought her life had ended the night her mother died, but she was wrong. Sometimes, you have to lose everything to find yourself again. Sometimes, you have to hit bottom to learn how strong you truly are. Sometimes, you have to walk through darkness to realize the light was always there, waiting. And sometimes, the people no one sees are the strongest ones. The quietest voices are the ones that echo the longest. The most wounded hearts are the ones that love the deepest. Harper Sinclair proved that. Harper's story teaches us that dignity can't be stolen by anyone, that justice may come late, but it will come, that family isn't only blood, it's the people who choose to stand beside you in your hardest moments. If this story touched your heart, please hit subscribe on our channel, hit like, and share this video so more people can hear meaningful stories like this every day. We want to know how you felt about Harper's story. Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance? Have you ever had to fight to protect someone you love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the stories from the deepest parts of your hearts. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye.